All right, this should just work. All right. All right. Okay. So this came up because we got a couple questions on how you could build workers with JavaScript API for some heavy duty tasks and stuff. So I had at one point done this demo here. I don't know if many of you remember this, but I did a blog post on this and everything. But basically, the idea here is to do a spatial join in the browser, right? And doing it is a pretty intensive task. So if you get, basically the idea here is that you take two layers, you select all the features from those layers, or basically what you can see on the screen, and you do a join of them together. And the bulk of the work is done here. The problem is, and let's see if I can get this to kick off one more time. Let me make a change. I think that'll kick off a new run here. The problem is that it is, well, that's kind of small. Let me, excuse me for putting my size here back to normal. So the main issue here is the fact that if you have a lot of features, and by default I did this kind of zoomed in so that it worked a little better for demo purposes, but if I were to zoom out, for example, and have a lot more features displayed, the more features you have, like this, the harder the browser's gonna have to work. It locks up my UI. I can't scroll this legend anymore. There's more information here. And I can't pan the map. I can't zoom, do anything, right? I'm just like locked in because this is all happening on right in the browser, the main client. It wants me to exit the page or wait. I'll just wait. Is that going to break the rest of my browser? I don't know. Anyway, you can see how that could be a problem, right? You're dealing with multiples of thousands of features. You're doing a loop in a loop, checking values in there. Now, I did do a little bit of work here to try and, that's going to exit. A little bit of work here to, if I found a feature, remove it from the checks so you don't have to keep checking that feature and stuff. You can watch the other video if you want more details on how the spatial join actually works, right? And at the time, I say, you know, this would be a pretty good candidate to talk about building custom workers with the JavaScript API. And it is. It's a perfect candidate for something like that. So if you're unfamiliar with it, and it's not something that's really talked about too much, because this is more of an advanced use case, right? The JavaScript API, the ArcGIS API for JavaScript uses workers under the hood a lot. It's one of the many things that's used there. It does all the intensive tasks, parsing data and whatnot. Pretty much anything that's just, you know, heavy duty. It's going to take a while. But in the API, we have some documentation here under Esri Core Workers that you can look at to see how you could probably utilize workers on your own. Now, this is assuming that you're using the AMD CDN. I believe this documentation, it kind of explains how things are set up. You set up your config here, where it should look for a loader, right? Because it's once the workers are built, they have to get loaded somehow. They're not working off the main thread anymore, and they can dynamically load files and stuff. So you want to have a kind of a loader in there. But the cool part is that's all promise based, right? So you do a workers.open. You're going to open that worker. You get a promise back with your connection, you know, basically your worker. And instead of having to do the whole post message thing and listen for messages back and forth, you just invoke a method and pass some parameters to it. Now, the worker framework still has to follow the rules of workers where you can't pass like class instances back and forth. You can't pass like a map and a graphic. You have to be plain native JavaScript objects, right? Numbers, strings, object, JSON, stuff like that. Okay, so we're going to try and redo this here in a app and build a custom worker. So I pretty much just copied the code from here over here. I've got my to-do in here for stuff that I want to do. So the one thing you want to do is that you need to have a second build. Now, I have a Webpack build here that is just going to build the app, right? Now, technically, you could get away with using Webpack to do this. Webpack does support having an array for the Webpack config. If you return an array, you get two different configs in there, and one of them can be type worker, or just type web worker. I don't remember. It's in the Webpack documentation. That could do it. And actually, this is one of those, like, some behind the scenes stuff. This is one of those things that we kind of went back and forth before the ESM modules came out on should developers have to build their own workers as part of their build workflow. And at first we were, and we didn't think it'd be that kind of big deal. But after we kind of user tested and stuff a bit internally, it was like, well, it's an extra step. And, you know, they shouldn't really have to worry about it because technically the workers don't change from app to application if you're not doing custom workers. So there wasn't really a need to do it. So we just made them static. We built them pre-built. They're part of the static assets that you get to use. That makes it much easier on your own build. So if you're not using custom workers, you can ignore this complete video, go grab a coffee, go have some fun, whatever, right? But if you're interested in custom workers, then pay attention to this. So yeah, we kind of nixed that whole idea and went with the plain static assets thing here. Now, instead of using Webpack, though, I actually do prefer to use Rollup here. So I'll just make a Rollup config, a Rollup, and I'll call it worker.config.js. I probably should install all my dependencies in here first, you know, and no node modules in here. That'd be embarrassing if I try to build without it. So I've already got my dependencies in here. So I do have Webpack stuff. I've got Rollup along with some Rollup plugins as well. And of course, I've got ArcGIS core here ready to go. So what's going to go on my Rollup worker config, right? So I'm going to do a little bit of copy pasta here to save myself some time and bring in the plugins I'm going to need to use, right? I'm also going to go ahead and do this bit here for whether or not I'm doing a production build or I'm just doing a regular build. So I'm going to do an export default because Rollup lets me get away with doing this. Webpack will not get away with doing ESM in this config file. I probably can set a flag somewhere, but you know what? I'm not into it. So, okay, so the input here is going to be 2 files that you need to have. One is going to be our remote client. So this is our file that we use in the API to load all the workers. You need to build this file. Okay, and that's going to be under ArcGIS. Oh my God, I should just copy paste this. Core workers remote client.js. Okay, there we go. The next one is going to be my custom worker. Any custom workers I'm going to build, I also need to have a build file for them. So I'm going to have one called Spatial Join here. And, oops, can't do that. And this is going to be located under my source folder. And I'm going to call this file, when I make it, Spatial Join worker.js. Okay, so that's that. Some other interesting things we need here for the output. On this keyboard, like, why any keyboard? The L is right next to that. I don't know. I'm used to a different keyboard most of the time. Okay, so chunk file names. I'm going to copy this because I don't want to write all this. Okay, and so those are my chunk file names. Now my directory, I'm just going to dump it in the disk directory. And okay, so here's where things get kind of cool, right? So when you build the workers, they need to have a loader, a way to load things dynamically as needed, right? So it's got to load all the chunks of stuff. I mean, you could probably do this a few different ways, but for format, I actually do prefer to use system in here. And for the exports, I want to make them, oh wait, no, exports. I want named exports in here. Right. Okay, so there we go there. The rest of this isn't all that key here. It's just the plugins and then this little bit. I forget what this is needed for. Preserve entries, signatures, allow extension. I don't know, I forget what that's for. I think that's as .js on the imports. But yeah, I'm not a Rollup whiz, man. I know enough Rollup to get this kind of stuff done. Okay, but yeah. Okay, so now I have my Rollup config. And if my package JSON, there's other stuff going on. I've got npm run all installed because I need to run these things in parallel, right? So if I do a dev mode, right? So I'm doing development. You run npm, you run p and start and watch. So I'm going to run start, which is going to run the Webpack build. Watch is going to run npm run all. That's going to do all the watches here. So that's going to include Rollup and Webpack. right? It's going to run them both in watch mode. So it'll take care of that for you. So here's my Rollup Config and so forth. If you've ever had to run multiple builds at once, maybe in some kind of like micro front end kind of situation, you're probably familiar with running all of these npm run all, run p, and running things in parallel. That's pretty much what you got to do here, right? So let me just double check something here. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, you still have to do that. So, okay, the Webpack config is not going to change. It's just going to build my app. So, like I said, I need to have a file. I says I call it Spatial Join worker. So this could be my worker. Spatial Join worker, not workers, I believe. Worker.js. Let's see. Yeah, worker, not workers. All right. So that's going to be my worker file. And you know what? I'm going to copy this because I've written this like a dozen times over here. It's pretty much this code here, but I'll explain some things I need to do for it, right? I like those extra lines at the end. Okay, so I'm going to export a function called doSpatial. I'm importing graphic from the JavaScript API, and I'll tell you why in a second. I mentioned that when you pass data back and forth from the workers to the main thread, it has to be some sort of native JavaScript type, right? Objects, strings, whatever. So I can only pass JSON to this worker function, but I want to run this use a contains method that is on the API geometries to find out if a polygon contains some points, right? And I probably should name these like point features and polygon features, whatever, it doesn't matter. For this case, it doesn't matter. I want to check to see if there are points inside polygons. So I want that contains method to make it easier for me to do that. Right, so what I can do is I can go ahead and rehydrate these JSON features using graphic.fromJSON and then treat them like I normally would over here, doing the same kind of stuff I do. I iterate over the features, I do a count on the attributes. I'm going to use splice to go ahead and remove features that have already been validated and so forth and so on. But when I push them to this features array, I'm going to turn them back to JSON. So graphic.toJSON here. All right, so put them back in there, and then I return those results to the main thread as JSON objects, right? So now they're just plain JSON. I can use them. They're nice and happy. Not like this guy over here, all sad because I had my app crash because there are too many features. So, okay, so that's cool. Now let's go ahead and use it. So how would you use something like this? So what you want to do is you want to import the workers from ArcGIS core workers. You need config from ArcGIS core config. And if you've ever done stuff with like the assets to copy assets locally, it's kind of the same situation here, except now, don't worry about assets because you can still use the CSS and styles and whatever else, images from the assets on the CDN. But for the workers, what I want to do is I need to tell them, okay, the worker path is going to be in the remote client.js file that I'm going to build. And the loader URL, you know, for who's going to load these workers for me, is going to be system.js, and I'm just going to use it from JS deliver. Okay, so you can have system.js in your build somewhere and point it there if you want to. It doesn't really matter, but I'm going to use system.js. And there's no rule says you have to. I think you can even use like require.js if you want to. Maybe ESM works. No, because we need a loader URL. We check this loader URL for how to load everything. Right, so there's my system.js in there. So if I come down to my to-do here for the worker stuff, I'm going to do a few things. So I got my city results and these other FRS results, which I think are some sort of pollutant factories of some sort. So, okay, let's get the method for the connection to our worker. So I'm going to call it the Spatial Join. And that's going to be equal to an await for the workers.open. Okay, so now here's where things get kind of, well, not funky, but where you've got to do this whole new URL. And remember I called it Spatial Join.js. It's got a different name here, but when it gets built, it's going to be called Spatial Join.js, because remember when you load workers, they need to have an absolute URL. So you pass the URL, then you need to pass it the document dot what is it, base URI, not base URI. There we go. Thank you, autocorrect. I needed that. .href. So there, now we have an absolute URL that is going to go ahead and load our workers. Instead of having me trying to figure out the URL for my app, localhost, and have like a little flag or something to change it. Nah, just do this. It's easier. Save yourself some sanity. That's how you can go ahead and load my worker. Okay, so now I got my worker. I need some features. So a little bit more copy pasta just to save me some sanity here. I got my features 1, my features 2. I go ahead and map over these features, convert them to JSON. And now what I can do is I can go ahead and make some room here. I'm going to go ahead and get my features. So I'm going to get some JSON features. And that's going to be equal to an await again. And it's going to be a spatial join. Now I want to invoke a method on that spatial join. And it's called do spatial join. If you hear the fan behind me, I'm sorry. It is just way too damn hot to turn this fan off in here, especially with the bright light and my rig going and stuff. It's insane. So my apologies. And now for the second argument, I can pass data that I want to pass to the worker. So my arguments for that do spatial join function, which will be an array, and it's going to be an array with features 1 and features 2. All right, there we go. Not done yet, because now what I need to do is I need to go ahead and get these features. So I'm going to go ahead and say, because remember they come back as regular JSON, but I want them to be actual graphics when I use them, so I can add them to my layers. Yeah, add them to my layers, I think, what I want to do. Or just say layer. They're polygons. Yeah, it's just a single set of features. So now I can say that const features, I spelled that right this time? Yeah. Is going to be equal to JSON features dot map. And we're going to go ahead and say, what did I say it was? It's going to be graphic dot from JSON A. And then if you look down here, I'm actually creating my layers by passing the features to it for this join layer, and then it's going to get added to the map. It's got its own renderer and the whole bit, right? So let me see if I've done anything right. My first pass here. I did do some copy pasta, but that's no guarantee I didn't screw something else up in this build. Okay, so all that seemed to work. Where's my link to my localhost here? Like that. I'll open a different window you can't see. All right, let's close this. Come over here. There we go. Open DevTools, just see if anything breaks. Working, it's doing its thing. I can still interact. Oh, look at that. I was able to pan the map and everything. Did you notice that? Okay, let's try it again. So I'm able to interact with the legend. I can scroll it. I can pan the map. Although I don't want to pan too much because I think I do the layer view of what I can see in the view. That was fast. Okay, so let's do this. Let's test out the one that broke the CodePen sample, right? So okay, so here we go. Look at all those features. I don't know if this is gonna be quick. We might be sitting here for a while. So if anyone's got any questions, now we might have the time to ask me, because even though it is running in a worker, there's no guarantee it's gonna, it's still got to iterate over a lot of features. Running in a web worker doesn't necessarily mean it's automatically super fast. It just means you're offloading the work to something else so that you can keep using your app and do stuff. If you're doing a ridiculous amount of work in a worker, it's still a ridiculous amount of work. But so far, nothing's crashed. I get no errors about, do you want to exit this page or wait for it to finish doing some work in the worker? It's just offload it. I don't care. So now I can just ramble as my web worker goes through some thousands, maybe a few 100,000 features, which will equal maybe like a million iterations of going over stuff. It's a good thing I didn't add any logs to that thing, or else that would slow it down even more. Yeah, console logs do slow down like stuff you do. But yeah, it's still going. It's still doing its thing. And no one's got any questions. So I'm going to assume everybody's already figured this stuff out for themselves and knows what they're doing. But yeah, so trust me, it's working. It's doing its thing. I'll wait like another minute or so to see if it loads, but there's no guarantee it's going to load and work. But just to talk about this workflow again, is the important part is you need two builds: the build for your app and the build for your workers. And that is key because the workers have to get built separately. And like I said, you could use two Webpack builds, for example, to do it. I just happen to prefer using Rollup to do the worker build and then Webpack for the app build. This also is useful if you're doing maybe like a, well, I don't know really. I haven't tried this with like a Create React app or another CLI based thing. And there we go. Hey, it worked. Man, that was a lot of features. I should have kept track of like how many iterations that was and how, but I'm not going to run it again to do that a bit. But it worked, and I was able to use my app, and everything was dandy, right? But like I said, I just prefer to use Rollup, and I don't know what happens if you try to use this like with Create React app or something like that. I mean, it will work. There's no question about that. It's just I don't know the workflow with it, right? Like, I don't know how to use Create React app to do like a parallel builds and stuff, and so I'm gonna leave that to anyone that wants to explore that. I don't really use Create React app and stuff like that too often. I use Dojo CLI, but I haven't tried this worker bit with Dojo CLI to see how it works out and stuff. But if you're interested in this and you want to know, and one of the reasons I want to talk about it today is the fact that we've got a new sample on JSAPI resources, which is this sample that shows you how you can do custom workers with JavaScript API. So it's on GitHub, Esri JSAPI resources. If you look in the ESM samples, and here we add this new one for custom workers. And this exact app that I just showed you today, which is where I was doing some of my copy pasta from. But yeah, try it out. Let us know how it works for you. Like I said, you might want to use this in certain situations, but if you don't need it, don't force it, right? Don't overcomplicate things for yourselves, because this is just one more step in your build process that could go wrong. Right, not to scare you away or anything, but I'm just saying from experience, the more things you start adding to your build steps, the more chances that you're just going to break something. So use cautiously, but if you do, I hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions, go ahead, feel free to hit me up anytime. Anything I can't answer, I'll try and find someone that can. God help them. And yeah, we're good to go. So if you like this, be sure to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what else you guys want to see. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.